All right, welcome everyone. We are about to go on a pretty wild ride. We're going to start with that nagging feeling you get about our economy, and we're going to end up in the absolutely mind-bending world of quantum physics and consciousness itself. So yeah, let's just dive right in.
It all kicks off with this simple question, doesn't it? Why does the economy feel so unstable, so confusing? Kind of like a boom and bust roller coaster that you have absolutely no control over. It's a feeling a lot of us share. And believe me, the answer is way, way stranger than you might think.
So to even begin to solve this mystery, we first have to pull back the curtain on what money is. Because what we all think it is and what it actually is in practice, well, they are two very, very different things.
Okay, so this is the core secret of modern banking, and it's a shocker. We tend to think that governments are the ones printing all the money, but in reality, the vast majority of it, I'm talking over 97%, is created out of thin air, ex nihilo, by private commercial banks, and they do it every single time they issue a loan. They aren't lending you someone else's savings, they are creating brand new money with a few keystrokes on a computer.
And this brings us to a really crucial point. The banks get to decide where all this new money goes. Now, when they direct it towards what's called productive credit, it funds new businesses, it creates new goods and services, and you get stable growth. But all too often, they pour it into unproductive credit, basically just speculating on existing assets like stocks and real estate. And that is what fuels those massive asset bubbles and the inevitable, painful crashes we've seen time and again in places like the US, the UK, Spain, and Ireland.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. At the end of the day, the system isn't backed by gold, it's not backed by anything tangible. Its value is, well, it's a metaphysical concept. The whole thing only functions because we all collectively trust and believe that it does. It's really just a shared story we've all agreed to live inside.
So what happens when that shared story starts to fall apart? When the system feels unjust, it creates more than just economic problems. It actually ignites this deep personal crisis within all of us.
The great media theorist Marshall McLuhan had this really chilling insight. He said that when people lose their sense of who they are, their identity, they often turn to violence to try and find a new one. He argued that our modern electric media makes us feel disembodied, kind of detached from our physical reality, and that just speeds up this loss of self.
You see, this loss of individual identity creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes what the psychologist Carl Jung called the collective shadow. These are powerful, irrational, unconscious forces. When one of these archetypes gets activated, it just floods our minds with this unshakable feeling of being right, making us totally immune to facts, to logic, or to anyone else's point of view. Does that sound at all familiar?
And this, right here, leads us to the central question of this whole explainer. How is it even possible? How can something as abstract as a belief, whether it's belief in money or belief in an ideology, how can it physically warp our world and our very identities so powerfully? There's got to be some kind of physical bridge here.
To find that bridge, we have to leave economics and psychology behind for a minute and venture into the truly bizarre world of quantum physics, specifically into this strange state of matter known as a superfluid.
Okay, you gotta stick with me here, because this is where it gets weird. Second sound is a real thing. It's an experimentally verified phenomenon. In an ultra-cold superfluid, something like liquid helium, heat doesn't just spread out randomly like you'd expect. No, it travels as a coherent, organized wave. It's a deeply strange, totally counterintuitive fact about how our universe actually works.
So what's carrying this heat wave, this second sound? Well, the physical carriers are these things called phonons. You can just think of them as these tiny collective ripples, these little packets of vibration moving through the superfluid. They're the messengers that carry the energy of heat in this perfectly organized way. And here we arrive at the big leap. If these little ripples, these phonons, can carry the information of heat in a coherent wave, what other kinds of information could they carry? Could they maybe carry something like belief or memory?
This very question leads to a radical, and I mean radical, new theory of everything. It's called the psychedelic superfluid universal morphonic oceanic wave theory, or, PSUMOT for short.
So here's the core idea. PSUMOT suggests that the fundamental substrate of reality isn't just empty space, it's a conscious quantum superfluid, an ocean. And in this universal ocean, phonons don't just carry heat, they act as the physical carriers for all information. We're talking about the patterns that shape biological forms, the resonance of our memories, and the very structure of our collective beliefs.
Now, this idea completely flips our understanding of mind and matter on its head. In this model, consciousness isn't something the brain creates, it's a fundamental property of the universe itself. The brain is more like a radio transceiver, tuning into specific frequencies within this universal field. And our shared beliefs, our cosmic habits, they get physically encoded as stable patterns within that superfluid, influencing everything.
The implications of this are just staggering. This theory suggests a way to build a bridge for our entire existence, from the moment we arrive in that baby carriage to the moment we depart for the crematorium, and it helps explain what's happening to our minds in between.
And this leads to a really profound idea for how we experience life. Our reality is observer-shaped. You see, we're not just passive observers looking at some fixed external world. Instead, our consciousness, which is tuned by our beliefs and our memories, is actively co-creating reality by interacting with this superfluid field of pure potential. We are literally, physically shaping the world we perceive, moment to moment.
This model even proposes a physical mechanism for what happens at the end of life. It calls it the DMT decoupling protocol. It suggests there's a program sequence. First, a final massive release of natural DMT in the brain acts like a key. This takes our everyday reality filter, the default mode network, offline. Then, what follows is this huge surge of coherent gamma brainwaves, which could be the physical basis for that life review phenomenon people report. And finally, a burst of light from our cells might be the very act of our consciousness being released from its material anchor.
And in that transitional state, that liminal space, the observer shaping effect becomes total. People who've had near-death experiences often describe meeting entities that aren't made of matter, but of pure information. They say they're literally made of words, of grammar, of pure linguistic constructs. This suggests that at its most fundamental level, reality might just be linguistic, a kind of story being spoken into being.
Which brings us right back to where we started. From the charade of money to the very fabric of the cosmos, the one constant is the power of our belief. So, if our collective beliefs are physically encoding patterns into a universal, conscious superfluid, what story are we telling? What reality are we all choosing to create, together, right now?